evening, wherever in the globe you're joining us from. This is our growth chat on how to humanize your brand by building a community. And we have Daisy here with us, who's taken the time to speak to us. I'm Asma from Mailmodo. I manage the growth initiatives at the CEO's office. For a quick intro on Mailmodo, Mailmodo is an interactive email marketing tool. We help marketers 3x their email conversions by helping them create app-like emails. We are thrilled to do this Go Chat today. So Daisy here is a founder. She's a lot of things. Daisy is a lot of things. Yeah, yes. So Daisy, I'm just gonna say it out loud, right? Just looking through your profile and all of the things you've done, there's a lot. There is just a lot. So to put it as succinctly as I can, Daisy is the founder of the Selfhood. She believes in making the URL as human as the IRL, and we'll get to that in a minute and what that means. She's also a strategist, a speaker, storyteller, community expert. She started out by studying fashion at university, but specialized later in digital media and online consumer psychology. Post-graduation, she's worked with brands like Pernod Ricard, Nasty Gal, Skinny Dip London, but she felt somewhere that there is a lack of down-to-earth, real and human advice available for those trying to find their way in the world of digital marketing and social media. So, which is where she decided to start up on her own and founded Selfhood to bring that to life. Yeah. Awesome. Daisy, is anything else you'd like to add to that introduction?
I think you've nailed it there, to be honest, and you're right. There's a lot of things there. So when people say to me, what do you do? I always struggle to answer that question because there's a lot. But yeah, for me, ultimately, the main thing that I focus on within my job as a strategist and within the agency and with clients is really working on that community building piece, which I know we're going to talk about today. But our focus, exactly as you said, it's about making online interactions feel as human as in-person interactions, and really building relationships between brands and their audience and eventually their communities. But no, you summarized it very well. So thank you for such a great introduction.
My pleasure, Daisy. So let's dive right in, right? You talk a lot about building a community, and what, according to you, defines community building? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Of course. So I think it can be quite confusing initially because your community is still a segment of your audience. And I think that's sometimes where the lines get a little bit blurred. So the way that I see it, and lots of people see it, is that an audience, could be big, could be small, are a group of people who follow you, interact with you online and offline. A community is a group of people within that audience who connect with you, engage with you, but they also connect with each other. And they are the people who will set alarms on their phone when you have a new collection dropping or you're about to announce a new service. They are the people who will be the first to sign up to your events. They are the people who will be out for dinner with their friends or talking to people and advocate for you. So they're a group of people who essentially take time out of their lives and their day to be really loyal to you and what you offer over your competitors, but they also interact with each other. So a really good example of brands that do this really well, both Nike and Adidas, huge global brands, they have massive audiences online, but they also have an app, and within that app, within your local area, they run local events. So I live in London. They have studios in East London where I can go as an Adidas community member and join free workshops around well-being and mental health and setting goals around your fitness and meet with other people in that Adidas community. So those two brands do a really good job of, even though they're a huge global brand, they do an incredible job of creating communities, and I think that kind of speaks for itself. If we look at the major brands in the world, Apple do it as well. So if you go into Apple stores, quite often they'll run free events for their community to come and learn about photography and connect with each other. And actually, if we can see that the leading global brands in the world are doing that and setting out those community building initiatives or those community growing initiatives, then there's obviously, you know, real power in that. And I think for me, the brands that have engaged communities and the brands that really invest in not just nurturing top of funnel audiences and looking at brand awareness are the brands that are super sustainable and end up with lots of longevity, because paid social PR, all of that stuff is great for getting eyes on your brand, but consumers demand more from brands now. They want brands with purpose, they want brands that care about them, they want brands that actually recognize them as an individual and not just a number or an Instagram follower. So I think community, it's, you know, it is a bit of a buzzword and it's been on the radar for a long time, but we're also seeing this trend of subcultures emerge, and subcultures are such a heavy part of society now. And actually, if brands can tap into those subcultures and help them build communities, I think that's the future of marketing, and that's the future of relationship building between brands and their consumers. Because like I said, consumers now, not all of them, but a lot of them want to know that their money is being invested in brands who care about the planet, care about people. They want transparency and they want to feel part of something that is for a bigger purpose. So yeah, in a nutshell, community is the kind of more hyper engaged segments of your overall audience, and your audience is just the people who maybe interact with you, follow you, engage with you, but your communities are like your die-hard fans.
Got it. Very interesting take, Daisy. I love how you're highlighting that it's no longer just about buying the best product in the market. More so, it's about what is the brand that's resonating with me. Where am I feeling a sense of belonging? I feel they understand me, and so forth. Very interesting take on that. So just doubling down a little more on that, Daisy. How is that different from building an audience, right? Because audience building also is a very similar endeavor where you are building a following of folks, across geographies, across designations, personas. We talk about bio personas, all of that. And we are bringing together similar minded folks. Our brand is bringing together similar minded folks, and that's how we build the audience. So how is community building different from audience building?
So I think with community building, I always liken it to friendships. At school or in your adult life, that friendship takes time and you need to get to know each other. And quite often when you meet someone for the first time and you go on to become really good friends, it's because you have things in common, your values are aligned, you think they're a good person, they're reliable, they stick to their word. And exactly the same goes for building a community for a brand. So an audience, I might become part of an video or through an influencer collaboration or through a piece of PR, find a brand online, check out their profile, but actually their content doesn't really resonate with me, or they're not doing a great deal to engage with me on a personal level or create and where's the synergy in that, and then creating content that aligns with both the values so that you magnetize that audience or that community. Then once that community is following you, there's a nurture period that needs to happen. So I personally think the best way to grow a community right now, if you break it down into steps, is yes, that top of funnel piece needs to happen where we look at brand awareness techniques like PR, TikTok, paid advertising, all of that kind of top of funnel stuff. but then it's actually about giving them an intimate space, which I know we're going to talk about a bit later, but beyond social media, for them to interact with you and each other. So it could be that, you know, you get them on a newsletter list, or you get them, a newsletter list is probably a good place to start, and you give them gated exclusive content so they feel valued. Event, or a WhatsApp group, or a Telegram group, or a Discord group, but within those spaces you actually give them exclusive content, so content that isn't just available to the audience. So a really good example of this is All Saints, the fashion brand. They have a Discord channel that they invite their fans to, and they do where they get live feedback from their community. They actually implement that into their new collections. They also share new products before they've even launched to get feedback. They let them shop it first. But what I would say with that is, if you are going to go down that route, then it has to be moderated and it has to be done well, and there needs to be community managers. And I think quite often where brands go wrong is that they don't invest in community management, and that's, for me, a really key component of building a community. Is if someone is taking the time to message you, to comment, to interact with you, interact with each other, there needs to be someone on the side of the brand that is facilitating those conversations and acknowledging those conversations. So a really great example of this is a razor brand called Hey Eastrid. And they sell razors, but the premise of the brand is shave if you want to, you know, don't fall to society's expectations. It's up to you. It's all about female empowerment and positive body image, but their community management is incredible. And I actually had a really great experience of that once. I replied to one of the comments on one of their Instagram posts. I was just kind of having a funny back and forth with someone else in their community. They shared our comments and said, "This made us laugh so much today." And then they sent me a gift box just to say, "Thank you so much for the interaction. You really made us laugh." I won't buy razors, part of something, and I was acknowledged. And I think, I'm not saying that every brand has to surprise and delight every single person that comments on their posts, but how can you foster that community, and how can you really, I guess, reward those interactions as well, and acknowledge that you're seeing them, and acknowledge that there are people that are taking their time to with you and other members of your community. And I think that's where real bonds are formed, and that's where people feel more of an emotional connection to a brand, other than just following them because they post pretty pictures and they've got nice products. It's how can we actually encourage this conversation, and how can we go out of our way to acknowledge it, because people do just want to feel part of something. As humans, we are designed to, we're tribal creatures. We're designed to interact with other people, and human connection is such a core and key component to our overall happiness. And that's why a large part of my work is about URL and IRL, because that IRL mentality of wanting to belong, why we join sports teams, why we join book clubs, why we join all of these things offline, it's exactly the same reason that we join them online. And I think it's brands' responsibilities to really recognize their community and create those spaces where they can interact. And like I said earlier, I think there's so much longevity in that. And actually, it's far more lucrative for most brands to have a returning customer than continuously just keep acquiring new ones. The cost per acquisition is statistically a lot higher. So if you can really look after the people who are rooting for you and the people that are investing in you, then not only is it more rewarding because you're facilitating amazing connections, but it's also going to cost you less money.
Awesome. Amazing to hear that. Very interesting take on it, Daisy. Really find your mapping from the human connection, or how humans relate to each other in and the science of psychology, and the sense of belonging, to how brands can leverage that to amplify retention, amplify nurturing, amplify building a brand that lasts, and
Yeah.
even in terms of business goals, reduce the cost of customer acquisition. So very, very interesting take on that. As now that we I think are aware or understand why a community is so important, how do you think you can start building one? A marketer, a community manager, a founder, how do you start building one that champions their brand? And your thoughts on that?
I think it's about being really clear on your individual story and what makes you unique. So, again, in the same way that we're drawn to people in person who we resonate with and connect with and feel more human and approachable. And one of my favorite quotes ever is vulnerability fosters closeness. So I know that the majority of my relationships and my friendships have really blossomed when I've been able to open up about something, or someone's been able to be open with me about something. So I think the same goes for brands. We really connect with the brands whose stories we know and have something that they really stand for, and that becomes really visible through their messaging and their content. So I think the first step is really about identifying, what am I, who am I as an individual, what makes me different from my competition. So the word selfhood, the reason I called my business the selfhood translates to the quality that constitutes one's individuality, state of having a unique identity. And the reason that I called my business that is because I think when you look at the brands that are amazing in the world and do great things, they have a really solid story and they have a really solid brand identity, value. So you look at Apple and Microsoft, kind of do the same thing but slightly different, but their stories are so different, the design is so different. So although they're competitors, they have very different communities and audiences because they've managed to differentiate themselves in a quite a saturated market. And everyone knows the story of Steve Jobs. Most people know the story of Bill Gates. So it's about really letting people into the window of what goes on beyond your shop window. So I always say to people that your social media channels are like your shop window. So when you go to Oxford Street, is your shop window, but then what you want to do is get them into the store, get them onto your mailing list, get them into that conversion point. So I think it's really about focusing on values, what story in a way that feels good and right for you, utilizing your shop window to share your values, to connect with your community, to really use it as a space to drive interest, share your stories and what makes you different. And then once you get them through that shop window, and whether it's onto a blog, a website, a newsletter, a Slack channel, a WhatsApp group, that's when you can really start to nurture it. So I hate the word funnel personally because I think it feels quite sterile and hostile. It's just not a nice word for me. So I think if you break it down and think of it more like a community journey, how are you actually nurturing these people on a personal level? So I think the first step really is about defining your values and what makes you different, and really
Yes,
crafting that story.
of course, Daisy. So this sounds like a very, very interesting take. How can people do this, in concrete ways? What are like the top three things somebody can do right away to make this happen? I'd love to implement some of the things you're talking about. So how do you get started?
And even if it's, oh, can you hear me okay? Hello?
Yes, I think we're having a little bit of technical challenges. Daisy, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes. Go on, Daisy.
Sorry about that. I think the first thing is to really craft your story. And even if you put that into a Word document and it's bullet pointed and you come back and you flesh it out, but really get clear on who am I, what I stand for, what do I do? And then look at who am I actually trying to target. And a lot of the time people will think about audience profiles and they'll write, okay, 18 to 24-year-olds in London. But I also think what's really important when you're doing that is to also identify the psychographics. So what do they want from life? What are their desires? What do they need? And that could be anything from, you know, and they value time with friends, and they want to know that their hard-earned money is going to causes that actually makes a difference to the planet. So that's the first two things I do: craft your story, look at what makes you unique, really work out your values, and then it's about identifying those people. And then the third thing is actually identifying where those people hang out. So a lot of the time I'll speak to people and they say, oh, we really need to get on TikTok. And I'll say, do you? And they'll say, yeah, we definitely need to be on TikTok. But what they haven't done is actually mastered their existing channels. So they're just jumping across lots of different platforms, but they're not actually investing time in the ones that they already have. So I always say to people, it's so much better to really do a great job on 1 to 3 channels and really, you know, put lots of time and energy into that, then spread yourself thin across 5 or 6 channels just to have a presence on there. So I think really researching into where people are likely to be. It might be that they're on TikTok, but it's well worth doing some research on whether you actually think there is an appetite for what you do on there before you go and jump ship and neglect your other channels as well. So yeah, storytelling, finding what makes you unique, really identifying your values, looking at the psychographics as well as the demographics of who you're trying to reach, and then doing some really heavy research into where you think you could foster and nurture those communities online.
Awesome. Absolutely. Those are some great points, Daisy. You mentioned about user-generated content and you know, build brands. What do you think about that? We'd love to hear more on that.
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting conversation happening about both of those things at the moment. So user-generated content is obviously a form of content that comes from your community, your audience, your customers. So lots of fashion brands, for example, will have hashtags that they send out with products to encourage user-generated content that they can then share on the feed. And that shows a nice variety of content. It social proof because it shows potential customers that there's people out there buying your product and they advocate for it. So UGC is amazing, but then we also have what's called UGC. This is where I think it's really exciting for brands, and I think this is a huge shift in what we were seeing before. So historically, brands have worked with influencers where they've gifted them or paid them to promote their product, are more of a tool to drive brand awareness, drive conversions. Typically, if brands are paying an influencer, it's because they expect maybe not necessarily direct ROI, but some kind of metric in return. So maybe it's a spike in followers, engagement. Whereas UGC apologies, can you hear me okay?
Yep, totally.
Yep. So UGC creators are essentially people not necessarily employed, they can be freelance, but people who create content on an ongoing basis for brands in order to humanize their feeds. So a really good example of this is later.com. They're a social media scheduling tool, and on TikTok they create amazing content on TikTok, but they have a roster of UGC creators on rotate. So what that does is builds familiarity because you start to recognize the same people in their content, but it also humanizes their feed. Another great example of this is Skinny Dip London. So I used to work for Skinny Dip years ago, and on TikTok, they don't really sell products a lot. It's not really a sales tool for them. It's more brand awareness, but it's always their team. So their team are really at the forefront of their content, which again really helps build that human feel, and it really helps build also behind the scenes content. So behind the scenes content is a really great way to build more of a connection with your audience, build more of a connection with your community. London and later.com, really great to look at, especially over on TikTok. So yeah, I think there's a big difference between UGC content and UGC creators right now. UGC content can be both UGC creators, but it can also be content from your community, content from your customers, from your audience. And then, yeah, I'm also seeing lots more brands who are encouraging their employees to have more personal brands. So Gymshark on LinkedIn, really great example. Gymshark are a huge international sportswear and gym clothing brand. They've done amazing things. They've grown really quickly, but their creative team and their in-house team all seem to be really working on their personal brands at the moment and sharing their journey so far. And I think that's a really nice way to see how Gymshark are supporting their staff, but also get a feel for the internal culture in less of a forced way. So it's not coming directly from the brand account and them saying, look at this amazing incentive we've offered our employees. A real human being is saying to me, oh, wow, I was allowed to take off a mental health day last week. And that feels more authentic because it's come from an actual employee and a person. So it feels more transparent and honest. So I'm definitely seeing that brands are utilizing their community employees more to showcase the kind of human and internal culture of the business. And I think that's a really great step, especially because about supply chains, how employees are treated, whether brands are sustainable, whether they donate to charity, all of the things that, and it comes back to that values piece. And you've got your community values and your brand values, and ensuring that they marry up is a really key part of a community building strategy. But I think that transparency piece is now coming to life so much through the employee advocacy, but also this shift towards UGC content creations and content creator. It is just helping, especially bigger brands, really humanize themselves, which is a huge shift we've seen, especially since TikTok has become such a key player among the social media platforms. I think TikTok's really kind of flipped the funnel in terms of Instagram was historically quite glossy and product focused. And it was kind of, really about maintaining a certain lifestyle and image. And TikTok kind of came along and said, we're not doing that anymore. We want to see the real side of what it's like to be on the internet and a human and a person. And I think especially younger generation admire that. When you look at how celebrity culture has shifted so much, even in the last 10 years, we used to idolize pop stars and actors and famous people in Hollywood. And now a lot of young people's superheroes and icons are TikTok creators who open up about their mental health journeys and their struggles with neurodiversity and lots of neurodivergent.
Takes Daisy, and I don't just mean to flatter you, right, as the moderator here. It's brands becoming more human is in itself, to balance the, I guess, the business goal as to is too much humanizing, and but at the same time, but at the same time, just realizing that people value authenticity over all else. Authenticity, transparency is key, and at the end of how you see, UGC creators sharing that, and employees or other team members, right?
Yeah.
Unless they themselves believe in the brand identity and the brand goals at the core of their values, and unless their values align with the brand values, only then it's going to shine through. The customers, leads, anybody in the funnel will see that, right? Awesome. And I've just put you in the spotlight, given you're the guest here, to here front and center. Love how this conversation is going, Daisy. So how can we now go into storytelling, right? Like, you touched upon this briefly earlier about how storytelling is very important to engage a community, and have to establish a trustworthy brand identity, right? Based on shared values, based on who you are as a brand, and first recognizing this as a brand. But how does this play out in reality? What are some strategies, actionable strategies, that our listeners tuning in on LinkedIn, attendees on Zoom, start telling their stories, start actioning on it, build an identity, brand identity, and engage in community? Where do you start?
So, sorry, is the question about how to build a brand identity?
How do you rather do the storytelling part? I think the brand identity we've covered briefly.
Yeah.
The storytelling part of it, right? Maybe your top 3 actionable ways of storytelling, because storytelling again is a skill and art on its own.
Yeah, of course.
And some people it comes naturally, some people it's a learning curve. To each person has their own journey towards it, right?
Yeah.
How does storytelling help? What role does storytelling play? How can you start doing this? Let's probably assume a person whom storytelling.
I think different depending on what you're selling. So for me personally, throughout growing my own community, storytelling has been a key part of me actually building genuine connections with people. So I often share within my own content mistakes I made when launching my business, but what I learned from them. So I'm opening up about my personal lived experience. I'm sharing that story of failure with them. But what I'm also doing is saying, don't make my mistake. Here's what I learned from it, and here's how to avoid that happening. So it's like, I'm going to share something a bit vulnerable with you, and I'm going to share with you, a time that things weren't so great, but I'm also going to give you the value of, but here's how not to follow in my footsteps. Here's how not to do what I did. So I think drawing on your lived experience and sharing your personal stories, and that can be the highs and the lows, is really important. There's also lots of brands who have been birthed and influenced by a really specific thing. So I had a meeting with someone last week. They were launching a gym brand, and the whole inspiration was behind their grandparents and their heritage. And there was so much richness to that story. And actually, that was the defining part of their brand. It wasn't necessarily, the gin sounded great. I'm sure it tasted great. But actually, it's about how do we buy into the history of that? And I guess it's about showing people beyond the glossy product. So I work with lots of artists, and I say to them, I buy lots of prints and art for my house, but when I see an artist and their process and their creative process come to life, I have so much more admiration for it, because I can really see the craft that goes into it. So again, there's a piece on behind the scenes content I think really aids in storytelling. But then also for fashion brands, for example, it could be that you document the initial inspiration. So it could be mood boards or images that you've taken while you've been traveling that have really influenced your new collection. And then you show them the illustrations and the samples, and you really take them on that journey of concept to final product. And so for me, that's kind of product-based businesses. It's like the ideation through to final product. And for me, I often do lots of behind the scenes content where I'll say to people, come and spend a day in my life, and I'll just show them the ins and outs of my day.
And it's fascinating because it's kind of boring. Like I don't have a particularly rock and roll life by any means, but that content gets really great engagement because it builds up a deeper connection. And I've spoken about this at length before with quite premium and luxury brands. And I've always, not always, but occasionally had pushback and said, we don't want to share that kind of content because we think it will devalue the brand. But if you look at Vogue, for example, who are probably the most prestigious publication in the world, on YouTube, they have so much behind the scenes content from photo shoots and events that they do, but they capture it in a really premium and luxury way. So it's not devaluing the brand, it's not someone sat in their pajamas. It's, it still feels premium, but they're still taking their community and giving them that exclusive content and feeding them the stuff that you don't see in the magazine and that you don't see anywhere else. So I think that kind of storytelling piece can be done on your own terms. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to do a day in the life like I do. It's what makes sense for you and your brand. But I can't remember the statistic, but I did read somewhere, and it's a really high percentage of founders and who have really strong founder presence, he get higher engagement and get more kind of I'll have to dig it out, sorry, I can't think off the top of my head, but it was a really interesting article around how having a story and a founder that's really present throughout the comms and the marketing typically gets better engagement and has a higher conversion rate. So I think just really peeling back, what was it that prompted me to start my journey, and what is it that I love about my work? What are some of the kind of key milestones that I can pepper into my content, and how can I really build on this journey and take people on a journey of my ideas and my concepts and how I bring all of that to life? Because we're naturally very nosy. So if you type into TikTok packing orders, there are millions of videos of people just packing up orders, and they get millions and millions of views and likes and comments. And it's kind of like, whenever people say to me, I don't want to share my behind the scenes or my story, it's really boring, I always say, go on TikTok and type in packing orders, and you will literally see people just putting stuff in boxes, and people love it because we're just nosy and we like that content. So I think it's really about how.
Absolutely, Daisy. So, Daisy, from everything you just shared, right? The one line that keeps popping in my head is just keep it real, keep it simple, keep it real. As much as we talk about strategy and trying to put all the variables together to find some mastermind plan to engage people.
Yeah.
Go with the process, trust your gut, do what works, tell your story, people understand, people relate, people empathize, and people admire you for that transparency and the vulnerability, and those who resonate are the ones who probably are going to buy from you at some point, right? Like to also keep it very real on that front. So a very, very interesting thought there, Daisy. I'm gonna go from the concept of storytelling to the channels on which we do this. You spoke about TikTok briefly, and TikTok is definitely something that Gen Z is very passionate about. But we have more. We have Slack, we have Discord, we have Reddit. In the space, they're becoming game changers and affinity. So do you have any examples and tips for people to looking to establish themselves on these portals? And you can go channel by channel if that works. But I think what would really help our audience, based on our understanding of our audience, is that each channel is different. So we would like to understand how we can provide the most value for each channel. So yeah, over to you on that.
Yeah, you're so right. It's been so interesting over the last few years to watch this shift into, they're not, I instinctively went to call them offline communities. They're not at all. They're still very much online, but they're moving away from the kind of traditional social media space. So your Instagrams, TikToks, YouTube, which feel more kind of public, to these intimate, contained spaces. What I would say before we talk about the platforms individually is that it's really important that if you are thinking about doing that, and that is a part of your strategy, that you've got the resource to actually maintain those communities. Because if you're asking people to join something, but actually there's no one moderating it, there's no one encouraging it or facilitating it, then it kind of feels redundant. And I always say to people, your digital channels become a footprint for your brand. So if I stumble across a YouTube channel that you've created and there's been no activity on it for 2 years, I'm going to think, well, what's happened here? So it's always worth having that thought beforehand of, can I realistically maintain this? But WhatsApp are doing amazing things at the moment. So they've just launched communities, which is where you can create community group chats. And that can work for brands, that can work for individuals who maybe want to start a sports team, or like mums at schools, for example, who want to know about what the kids are up to. So a great example of a WhatsApp community, Elsie and Fred e-commerce brand, a fashion brand for women, and they have brand ambassadors called Riot Girls. So that's what they call their brand ambassadors. And they're all added to a WhatsApp group where they can share outfit pictures, events, and a lot of those girls have gone on to be really good friends, collaborate, and Elsie and Fred host exclusive events for them as well. So WhatsApp, I think, is great for really facilitating those conversations. Discord, I think Discord is still taking a little while to take off. I thought it would blow up really quickly. There's still definitely a space for it. So historically, Discord was a place for gamers specifically, and people interested in gaming and I think it was earlier this year, Gucci started advertising for a community Discord manager, and Discord has become huge since the rise of Web3, NFTs. It's a decentralized place, so your identity is anonymous, and lots of brands have started using it as a place to grow a community, facilitate conversations. So not too dissimilar to Slack. There's channels within Discord that people can join and talk within. So a lot of streetwear brands do resale and launch collections through Discord because they've got hype. I think I mentioned All Saints earlier. They're doing a really good job of Discord at the moment. So as I said, they share lots of exclusive products on there behind the scenes of product development. They often host Q&As as well. Some brands are on there, but the community, you are going to take that plunge, and if you are going to commit to that more intimate community, that you have community managers. And community managers in these spaces are very, very different to community managers on Instagram and Twitter, or Instagram and Facebook, or wherever you're marketing. Quite often community managers on traditional social media are responding to one person, whereas in these community spaces you're facilitating conversation amongst lots of different people and them talking together. Slack is also great. So I'm actually part of a community called Babes on Waves, and it's specifically for female founders, and they offer workshops and events and talks and mentorship for female founders, helping them navigate everything from finance, confidence, negotiation. But there's a Slack channel, and as soon as you join the membership, you're part of the Slack channel, and within that channel you can share opportunities. So let's say I'm working with a client and they need a photographer. I can post that opportunity to my community and say, I'm working with someone who needs a photographer. but then within that, they also do things like career wins. So you can share if anything great happens, let's say you get a new client or you achieve something that you're really proud of, you can share that with the community and they celebrate your wins with you. So it's a really amazing space that they've created, but there's someone in there that's constantly asking questions, that's constantly encouraging that conversation, and the community is really active. The community, there's lots of conversations happening daily. There's multiple people, they have multiple community managers that are really encouraging that conversation, really nurturing that conversation, bringing their community together. They're also an example of a brand who do community meetups and events. So they often host co-working days as well. They often host events and supper clubs so that the people in the Slack community can also meet up in real life. So I think, there's obviously a few different examples there and there's a few different channels, but I think the key takeaway and the key thing to bear in mind is that it needs to be facilitated, and it needs to be facilitated well. I think another bonus of having one of those more intimate spaces and more of an intimate channel is that social media is becoming more saturated and users are being more concerned with about their privacy and how their data is being used. And I always say to people, it is also rented land. So if Instagram collapsed tomorrow, where are you going to market to people? So I think it's also about building different channels and email marketing. I say to everybody, capture that data and make first party data a priority, as well as your kind of traditional social media, because email marketing is amazing. You get direct access to their inbox, as I'm sure you're experts in that. But then also these kind of more intimate communities in these less traditional spaces, it's a great way to also get feedback for your business and hear the real sentiment of what people are saying about you, how they feel about your product, how they feel about what you offer in more of an intimate and personable space. So I think, sorry, that was a lot of words there. I hope that makes sense. But I think, the key things are
absolutely
communities outside of traditional spaces.
Totally. Definitely moving audiences from borrowed and rented channels to owned channels, which is email, is the ultimate goal here, so that then they are in a more intimate community, and email is also a direct channel to their inboxes. So speaking of email marketing, just some we're almost up for time, but we'll just take a 30-second view of what you think and how you think email can help nurture your community.
I love email marketing, and I think it's such an important part of community building. And I think there's a few different reasons why and how it can be really effective. I think the first thing is as I said earlier, you get direct access to somebody's inbox. So you're not fighting against algorithms and other people's content. You've earned that data, so you get priority access to communicating with that person. And I also think it's a good way to messages. And typically, I know that when I receive an email from a brand, if I like that brand, I'm more invested in actually reading the email. Whereas quite often on social media and other more traditional channels, if I'm in a hurry and I'm just browsing because I'm on the move, quite often I'll skip past it. So I think emails are a really good place to get across specific messages, but also setting up things like nurture sequences for courses and products and building segments and seeing how your customers and your community are buying as well, and then being able to reward And I think that's another really important part of community building, is rewarding people for their loyalty and recognizing their loyalty. And I think emails are a really great place to do that. So if you've got a group of people who are just consistently buying from you and supporting you and recognizing you can then share incentives with them and, you know, thank you so much for supporting our journey. Here's early access to our new collection, or here's 10% off, or here's free delivery. And people do want to be rewarded for their loyalty, because the fact is there's loads of competition out there. They could go and shop for your competitor, but they're choosing you, and they don't really owe it to you to be loyal. They just are. So I think emails are a really great place to incentivize and reward your community.
Brilliant, Daisy. So on that note, we're going to jump into the Q&A. We have a lot of very interesting questions. I'm going to start with Gimli, who's asking, what are some of the most influential storytelling mediums that you have found fruitful throughout your journey? And which medium works best for B2B SaaS? I think the focus is on B2B SaaS. Which is the most influential storytelling medium?
For me, I found LinkedIn for B2B storytelling. I would say LinkedIn. And I think LinkedIn has a reputation of being super corporate and not allowing for more human storytelling. But I found the complete opposite. I think especially the last few years, there's been a real shift in storytelling. And LinkedIn as a platform. And I've seen lots of creators now sharing their own struggles, their journeys. And there's a lot more diversity on LinkedIn now in terms of those stories and who's telling those stories. Because I think typically it's been very traditional, people in suits, quite corporate, sterile, but there's people from creative industries, there's mental health advocates, there's people who are starting their own charity initiatives, and it's become a lot more of an inclusive space to really champion important stories. So I think for B2B, LinkedIn's amazing, and I think there's definitely room for more human storytelling on LinkedIn now, whereas before I'm not too sure if that was the case, but I love LinkedIn for that.
Awesome, got it. So an anonymous attendee wants a quick advice on how to reduce churn rate. So, you know, probably your top, key to reduce churn rate. I think.
What do you mean by
community? Yeah, I think this is in reference. I believe this is in reference to the community. If the autonomous attendees are around, they can clarify what they mean by this.
So I've interpreted that as how to encourage retention, as opposed to people coming and going and not sticking around. Is that?
Yeah. Probably we can, if the attendees around, they can clarify.
I think, I think for me that is about incentives and rewards and really recognizing the people in your community. Something that I do often for my own community is to host focus groups. So I have sort of my top tier community, and then that I don't ever make them aware that they are part of top tier or mid tier, but I know who has been following my journey from the very beginning and has been super invested in my brand and comes to my events, buys my merch, signs up to everything that I do. And it's really important to me that I understand how they're feeling, what they need from me. So I think actually talking to your community in an IRL setting, and by IRL, I don't necessarily mean in person, but on Zoom, for example. So I speak to them very often and just find out, what are you struggling with online? Where are you at? How are you feeling? And I think that's a really good way to know the sentiment and the emotions that people are feeling, and then you can start to create content or help them in a really personal way. Because I think social listening is great and observing online is great, but quite often until you actually talk to your community, you don't really know exactly what they need from you. So I think having those intimate conversations, and as I said about like email marketing before as well, really rewarding them, because as I said, they don't have to buy from you. They can go to your competitor. So just letting them feel seen and heard and acknowledged.
Awesome. Great. So jumping on to the next question here, we have another anonymous attendee asking if TikTok would be a good channel for a B2B SaaS brand, even if their target audience is not on TikTok. Does TikTok make sense as a channel for a B2B SaaS brand?
It depends what your overall business objectives are. If you are B2B and your audience isn't on there and your business doesn't plan to expand in the B2C world or to the TikTok demographic, then probably not, no. That being said, there are so many niche communities out there and there's so many niche businesses that do live on TikTok. I do think anything is possible. I would never say, no, you absolutely can't create content for TikTok, but I think it's about assessing, is that resource best placed on a channel where there might not be a community for you, or do you invest that resource into somewhere like LinkedIn and really ramp up your efforts there, where you're probably more likely to see a return and also have a more captive community of people who actually need your services. So I think it's about really weighing up what resource you have and where that's best allocated. But yeah, if your business objectives aren't to grow brand awareness among younger demographics or branch out into B2C, then I'd probably say no.
Got it. Nice. Interesting. So, Daisy, there's a very interesting question from another anonymous attendee on if there are already really good marketing communities that are helping folks with best practices. Is it a better idea to help out there? Should we help out there rather than creating one from scratch?
It depends what you want to do. So if you want to create one from scratch, absolutely, because there is something for everyone. And people often come to me and say, I want to do this, but it feels really saturated, or I want to do this, but I'm worried about the fact that there's so much competition out there. And competition is a really, really good thing. When you reframe competition from being, it's a threat to my business, to competition allows me to see that there's demand in the market. It allows me to identify where there's gaps in the market within my field. It allows me to keep my finger on the pulse and ensure that I'm staying ahead of my competitors and that I'm staying on trend for the industry. I think there's actually so much benefit to competition that we don't really talk about. And I think that is where storytelling is paramount for when you start a new business or a new community that is already quite saturated, because it is your story that will magnetize people. And like we said earlier, when you meet someone for the first time and you click, it's usually because you have something in common, or they see something in you, or you're aligning. Same goes for brands and their communities. So if you were to start that and share your story, you're going to find people who resonate with you and connect with you and want to be part of your journey. So I wouldn't let the fact that there's already businesses or people out there doing what you're doing. I think it's about, personal choice. Do you want to go and work for another business, or do you want to start your own? But I certainly wouldn't let competition stop you from doing the latter.
Very interesting, Daisy. So we're almost up for time. We have a couple of more questions, so we're going to touch on them very briefly. What if the employees push for TikTok, but the employers don't want to participate for the content? So quick take on that.
That's a really tricky one, because I think, it is really tricky, because you can't force people into content creation. But I think it's about really explaining why it's beneficial. So if you have any stats or data, there's loads of articles out there about why TikTok and human content is really important and how it helps grow brands. So I think if you can take to them, some stats around that, some data around that, or even examples, if you've got any competitors that are doing great things and are seeing success. That's typically what I see with brands. When you say, well, your competitors are doing it really well, they kind of think, okay, right, that's we need to get onto it. So yeah, I think give them the data and also show them some case studies, ideally your competitors, and that sometimes gives them the boost that they need. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So Chintan and Zishan, both from Mailmodo, have sort of similar questions. So I'm gonna take the liberty to, you know, club them in the interest of time. And the main question being that should a brand build audience everywhere or on all social platforms, or focus on a single channel to build a community?
As I said earlier, it's about assessing that the resource that you have. So it's best to do 1, 2, 3 really, really, really well, and give them the time and energy that they deserve, rather than do 5 or 6 but spread yourself thin, not give yourself time to respond to messages, comments, encourage conversation. So I think it purely depends on the resource. If you have the resource, if you don't, no.
Awesome. Great. Lovely. So adding to that, specifically focusing on Twitter, right, given the recent changes happening with Twitter, Zishan is asking if that will have any impact on building an audience on Twitter for brands.
Honestly, I can't answer that because I just don't know. And I don't think anyone knows right now. I know that lots of agencies are advising their clients not to advertise on Twitter right now. I know lots of brands have pulled budget from Twitter or have left the platform altogether. Really hard to say. I think it's just a case of we just have to wait this one out and see what happens. But I do know that lots of brands have stopped altogether. So I think it's on this occasion, yeah, it's just a case of we just got to wait and see.
Awesome, Daisy. We're gonna wrap up with this last question from an anonymous attendee on how do you kickstart a community and earn the initial traffic? We have a minute for this, so yeah, over to you.
Sorry, could you say the question again?
How do you kickstart a community and earn the initial traffic? I think we've answered this in bits and pieces over the last 1 hour. But if you were to answer this specifically for this attendee, what would you say? How do you kickstart a community and earn the initial traffic?
If you're starting from scratch, I think it's really about experimenting with your content in the initial, working on that values piece that we spoke about. So who am I? What's my story? Who are my community? What do they believe? What do they want? What do they desire? How can I best serve them? Experiment with your content. So they say that video content is the highest converting form of media. So it might be that if what you're asking through your content and the call to action is to visit the website, subscribe, take that extra action, that your call to actions are really clear, but also giving them a reason and not just here's a product, go and buy it. Why should they? What makes you different? Why should your community choose you over someone else, and being really clear on that. But yeah, there's lots of other things. I'm just conscious of time, but I think you're right. We've kind of covered off quite a lot in this session anyway. So I think this is being recorded so people can absolutely watch it back and pick out the different pieces that we've been through. But yeah, I think it's really about giving them a reason beyond just a product or a service. It's what's the bigger picture here? Why should I be investing in you over someone else?
Awesome. On that note, Daisy, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pleasure for joining us here, taking the time. The last 1 hour has flown by. So on the behalf of the Mailmodo team, all of us would like to thank you. We have some goodies, resources that we've shared with the audience for attendees to take away, which we hope is helpful to you as you build a brand and build a community as well. So thank you so much. And we hope to keep in touch with you, Daisy, and do this sometime for another interesting topic, perhaps.
Amazing. Would love to. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you for joining in. Bye-bye.